The moment everything shifted in my family did not come during an argument. It happened while people were smiling for a photograph. My name is Helena Whitlock, and I am 64 years old. The evening had been planned as a simple housewarming. My son Ethan and his wife Vanessa had finished renovating a large old place a few blocks from Forsyth Park in Savannah, and they invited friends and relatives to celebrate. By the time the sun went down, the courtyard behind the house was full. Music played from a small speaker on the patio table, and someone suggested we take a group photo before people began leaving. Everyone gathered near the back steps. People moved closer together so the photographer could fit us all into the frame. I stood beside Ethan, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. Vanessa looked around at the arrangement for a moment, studying the group the way someone studies a photograph before it is taken. "Wait," she said. "Hold on a second." People shifted slightly, thinking she wanted to rearrange the group. Then she turned toward me with a small frown. "Could you step out of the picture?" she said. "Your face is ruining the aesthetic." For a second, nobody moved. Someone near the table gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "I think everyone fits," a man said quietly. Vanessa didn't look at him. "It will look cleaner without too many people in the frame," she said. The photographer lowered his phone slightly, as if he was not sure he had heard correctly. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to say something. He didn't. He only shifted his weight and stared somewhere over my shoulder. So I stepped out of the frame. At first, I thought I would stand behind the photographer and wait for them to finish. Instead, I kept walking. I passed the patio table, went through the courtyard gate, and crossed the quiet street to my car. Later that night, after I had gone home and changed into something comfortable, my phone lit up with a message from one of Vanessa's friends. "She's still crying." I stared at the words for a long time, wondering what had happened after I left. The truth is, though, that moment in the courtyard was not the beginning of the story. It only looked that way from the outside. That night, after the message, I sat at my kitchen table longer than I meant to. The house was quiet, and the silence gave me time to think about Ethan when he was younger. After my husband died, Ethan was 8 years old. For a long time, it was just the two of us figuring things out. We lived in a smaller place then, closer to downtown Savannah. Our routine was simple. I worked during the day, and in the evenings we cooked dinner together or walked through the neighborhood. When Ethan was little, he used to reach for my hand whenever we crossed a busy street. "Mom, wait," he'd say, grabbing my fingers before stepping off the curb. Once, when he was about 10, his teacher asked the class to write about someone they admired. At the parent meeting, she showed me Ethan's paper. "He wrote about you," she said, smiling. I read the page while she stood beside me. "My mom is the strongest person I know." Ethan had written in careful handwriting. That memory stayed with me for years. As Ethan grew older, things changed the way they do for most families. College, work, new friends. When he first introduced me to Vanessa, he seemed happy and proud. "Mom, this is Vanessa," he said the first evening they came to dinner. Vanessa smiled politely and shook my hand. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said. At the time, nothing about that moment seemed unusual. Ethan sat beside her at the table, talking easily, the way people do when they're excited about someone new. Looking back now, I realize I spent more time trying to make Vanessa comfortable than noticing the small ways the balance between us had already started to change. And the truth is, I didn't question any of it then. In the beginning, I tried to make things easy for Vanessa. When Ethan first started bringing her to family dinners, I made a point of asking about her work and her interests. She spoke confidently about design, photography, and the way homes should look when people walk into them. Vanessa cared a great deal about how things looked to other people. "I love spaces that feel intentional," she told me once while looking around my living room. I nodded. "Intentional is good." She tilted her head toward a bookshelf near the window. "Older styles can feel a little crowded, though," she said lightly. Ethan laughed from the table. "Vanessa notices everything," I didn't argue. It was my house, but I wasn't interested in competing over furniture. A few months later, they invited me to see the place they were planning to buy near Forsyth Park. The house needed work, but Vanessa walked through the rooms as if she could already see the finished version. "These walls should be lighter," she said, running her hand across the paint. "Neutral tones photograph better." Ethan looked at me. "What do you think, Mom?" "I think it's your house," I said. "You should make it the way you want." Vanessa smiled at that. Over time, I noticed she made most of the decisions. Ethan didn't seem bothered by it. If anything, he seemed relieved that someone else was organizing things. One evening during dinner at their place, Vanessa studied the dining room while we talked. "We're trying to keep everything cohesive," she said. "Too many different styles can make a space feel cluttered." Ethan nodded. "She's right. Consistency matters." I remember sitting there and realizing the conversation wasn't really about furniture anymore. It was about control. At the time, I told myself that couples develop their own rhythm. I didn't think of it as something that involved me. Still, I started to notice that when decisions were made, Vanessa usually spoke first, and Ethan usually followed. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, I began to feel less like a parent and more like someone visiting their home. The house near Forsyth Park didn't happen on its own. One evening, Ethan came to see me with a folder of papers in his hand. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and opened it slowly. "Mom, we found a place," he said. Vanessa leaned forward beside him. "It's perfect. The structure is beautiful. It just needs work." Ethan cleared his throat. "The problem is the down payment." I waited. "We're short," he said. "About $200,000. Vanessa didn't hesitate. "It's an investment. Once it's renovated, the value will go up immediately." Ethan looked at me carefully. "We were wondering if you could help." I didn't answer right away. It wasn't a small amount of money. Vanessa smiled in that calm way she had when she believed something already made sense. "It would only be temporary," she said, "and you'd be part of creating something beautiful." I eventually agreed. The money came from savings I had built over many years. After that, the renovations began. I spent weekends there sometimes, holding ladders or keeping their daughter occupied while workers moved through the rooms. Vanessa moved through the house like a director guiding a set. "These cabinets need to be replaced," she said one afternoon. Ethan nodded. "Whatever you think." Another day, she stood in the living room studying the walls. "Neutral colors will photograph better," she said. "Too many personal touches make a space feel cluttered." Ethan glanced at me. "Mom likes antiques." Vanessa smiled politely. "Antiques are fine, just not everywhere." I remember laughing softly so the moment wouldn't feel tense. "I suppose every house needs a theme," I said. Vanessa nodded. "Exactly." She thanked me from time to time for helping with their daughter or for bringing meals during the renovation weeks. Her words were always correct. "Thank you for watching her today," she said once while collecting the child's jacket. "You're welcome," I told her, but the tone never carried warmth. It felt more like acknowledging a service. Over time, I began to notice something simple. When I was helping, everything between us worked smoothly. When I wasn't needed, the room often became quieter around me. After I received the message that night, I kept thinking about the moment in the courtyard. Not the exact words Vanessa used. Those were clear enough. What stayed with me was the silence that followed. When she said, "Move out of the picture. Your face is ruining the aesthetic." I had looked directly at Ethan. For a moment, I expected him to react the way he used to when he was younger. I waited for him to say something simple like, "Vanessa, that's enough." Instead, he shifted his weight and rubbed the back of his neck, the way he used to when he felt caught between two people. "Let's just take the picture," he said quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms. "It's not complicated," she replied. "The frame works better without extra people." I remember the photographer standing there awkwardly with his phone in his hand. Someone near the steps murmured, "Maybe we should just move things around." Vanessa shook her head. "No, It's quicker if she steps out. No one argued. I looked back at Ethan once more. Do you want me to move? I asked. He didn't meet my eyes. It's just one photo. Mom, he said. That sentence was meant to make the moment smaller. Instead, it made it very clear. So I stepped out. The group shifted slightly, closing the space where I had been standing. The photographer raised the phone again. All right, he said carefully. Everyone smile. I heard the camera click as I walked toward the gate. Later that night, when I was home and the message arrived saying Vanessa was crying, I thought about the moment again. I tried to picture the party continuing after I left. Maybe someone asked where I had gone. Maybe Ethan shrugged. She just needed some air, he might have said. The more I thought about it, the clearer something became. Vanessa had spoken the words, but Ethan had allowed them to stand. In families, those moments tend to stay. It occurred to me then that the silence in the courtyard wasn't new. It had probably been there for a long time. I had simply chosen not to hear it. The message stayed on my phone for a long time before I answered it. She's still crying. It came from a woman named Claire who had been at the party. I remembered her vaguely from a few earlier gatherings. She and Vanessa had worked together at some point. After a while, I typed back, "What happened after I left?" The response came almost immediately. People were uncomfortable. Claire wrote, "It got awkward." I waited a moment before replying again. Awkward how the typing dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Well, she wrote, "A few people asked Ethan where you went." I pictured Ethan standing near the table where the drinks were set out. "What did he say?" I asked. Claire answered after a pause. "He said you went home." That sounded like him. Calm, simple, something that didn't invite more discussion. Another message followed. Some people thought Vanessa was too harsh. I stared at the screen. "Did anyone say that to her?" I asked. Claire replied. "Not directly at first." A few seconds later, another message appeared. But people were talking. I leaned back in my chair. What happened then? Claire's next message came slower. Vanessa heard some of it. I waited. She got upset. Claire wrote. Started crying in the kitchen. For a moment, I considered that. Did she say anything about what she said to me? I asked. The reply took longer this time. Not really. Claire wrote finally. She said everyone was making her look bad. I read that sentence twice. After a moment, I typed one last response. I see. Claire sent another message a minute later. I thought you should know. I thanked her and set the phone down. The room was quiet again. It occurred to me that Vanessa hadn't cried because she believed she had been wrong. She cried because other people had noticed. And those are not the same thing. For a long time, I had believed that understanding came first and consequences came later. That night, I began to realize the order might sometimes be reversed. In the weeks after the party, I didn't make any announcements about what I was doing. I simply began changing a few habits. For years, I had watched Ethan and Vanessa's daughter almost every weekend. The first Saturday after the party, Vanessa called in the morning. Are you still coming by at 10? She asked. I took a breath before answering. Not today, I said. I already made other plans. There was a pause on the line. Oh, she said. We were counting on you. I understand. I replied, but today doesn't work for me. She ended the call quickly after that. A few days later, Ethan called in the evening. Mom, Vanessa said you canceled on Saturday. I didn't cancel. I said, I just wasn't available. He sighed into the phone. You've always been available. That was my choice before. I said calmly. Another silence followed. A week later, he called again, this time about money. A contractor had found another issue during the renovation. We're short, Ethan said. About $10,000. I'm not able to help with that. I answered. What do you mean? He asked. I mean, you'll need to handle it. His voice sharpened slightly. Mom, you helped before. Yes, I said, and I'm glad I did. But that doesn't mean I can keep doing it. He went quiet for a moment. This is because of the photo thing. Isn't it? He asked. It's because of several things. I said, "You're overreacting," he said after a moment. "Vanessa didn't mean it the way you took it." I leaned back in my chair and let the words settle. "No," I said slowly, "I think I'm reacting for the first time." That sentence seemed to surprise him. "Mom, you're making this bigger than it was." "Maybe," I replied, "but I'm still stepping back." He didn't argue much after that. The conversation ended politely, though not warmly. When I set the phone down, the house felt unusually quiet. For the first time in a long while, my schedule belonged entirely to me. It felt unfamiliar at first. Then, gradually, it felt peaceful. That was something I hadn't expected. Once I stepped back, things began to change in ways that were easy to notice. I didn't hear it directly from Ethan or Vanessa at first. Instead, the information came through people who knew all of us. One afternoon, I ran into our neighbor Margaret outside a small grocery store downtown. She greeted me with the familiar curiosity people sometimes carry when they know something but aren't sure how much to say. "I saw Ethan last week," she said while we stood near the entrance. "Oh," I replied. "He looked tired." She continued. "He mentioned they're trying to sort out childcare." I nodded. "That can be complicated." Margaret hesitated. "He said the new sitter charges more than they expected." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. She looked at me carefully. "You used to help them a lot." "Yes," I answered. "I did." A few days later, I heard something similar from a mutual friend named Robert, who had worked with Ethan years earlier. "I ran into your son at a hardware store," he told me during a phone call. "He said the renovation costs are adding up." "That tends to happen," I said. Robert chuckled softly. He mentioned the contractor found another issue in the wiring. "I hope they manage it," I replied. Robert paused before asking, "Are you still helping them with the house?" "No," I said simply. He didn't press further. Over the next few weeks, I heard small pieces of information like that. Childcare schedules changing, contractors calling more often, Vanessa returning to work earlier than she had planned. None of it sounded like a disaster. It sounded like a household adjusting to something new. I didn't feel satisfaction when I heard these things. That would have meant I wanted them to struggle. What I felt instead was clarity. For years, I had been part of the structure that made their lives run smoothly. When that structure quietly stepped aside, the weight didn't disappear. It simply shifted onto the people who were actually responsible for carrying it. Ethan came by one afternoon without calling first. I heard his car pull up outside and saw him through the window before he knocked. When I opened the door, he stood there for a moment like he wasn't sure how to begin. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Come in," I answered. He stepped into the living room and sat down across from me. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Things have been tense lately," he said. "I imagine they have," I replied. He rubbed his hands together. "Vanessa's been having a hard time," he continued. "People keep bringing up the party. I waited. They're making it sound worse than it was," he said. "She feels humiliated." I nodded slowly. "That must be uncomfortable for her." He looked at me carefully, as if trying to decide whether I was agreeing with him or not. "She didn't expect people to react like that." He added, "I see." Ethan leaned forward. "Mom, the whole thing got blown out of proportion. She didn't mean to insult you," he said. I let the silence sit for a moment before I spoke. "Did you ever tell her what she said to me was wrong?" The question seemed to stop him completely. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I mean," he started. "It wasn't meant to." "That wasn't what I asked," I said quietly. He looked down at the floor. For several seconds, he didn't answer. In that silence, I understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. Ethan wasn't avoiding the question because he didn't know what to say. He was avoiding it because the honest answer would change the entire conversation. Eventually, he stood up. "I just want things to go back to normal," he said. I walked him to the door. "Sometimes normal changes," I told him. He didn't argue. He just nodded once and walked back to his car. And as I watched him drive away, I realized that clarity often arrives quietly, in moments when someone has nothing left to say. Several months after Ethan's visit, I went to a small picnic with a few friends near Savannah's waterfront. It wasn't a big gathering, just people who had known each other for years and didn't feel the need to perform for anyone. We were sitting on a bench finishing lunch when my friend Linda stood up with her phone. Before everyone leaves, she said, "Let's take a picture." People moved a little closer together. Someone waved me over. "Helena, come stand here," Linda said. I stepped between Linda and Robert without thinking much about it. "Is this all right?" I asked. Linda laughed. "Of course it is." Robert glanced at the screen of her phone. "Everyone's in the frame," he said. "Just take it." Linda lifted the phone. "Ready?" she said. We nodded. The photo was taken in less than a second. Later that evening, I looked at it while sitting at my kitchen table. No one in that picture had studied the arrangement or decided someone didn't belong. No one asked me to move. A few weeks after that, Ethan called again. "Mom," he said quietly, "things are still a little tense at home." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied. He hesitated. "Vanessa thinks maybe we should all sit down together sometime." "Maybe we will," I said. "But not until everyone understands what happened." He didn't argue with that. After we ended the call, I looked again at the photo from the picnic. For a long time, I believed keeping peace meant staying wherever people placed me, even when the space felt smaller each year. What I learned instead is simpler. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is step out of the picture someone else designed. If you've ever found yourself in a place where your presence had to be negotiated, remember this. Your place in the world isn't something other people get to edit. And if you've lived through something like this, I'd be interested to hear how you handled it. Stories like these rarely end the same way for everyone.